If I was going to choose one reading to not have the day after that gorgeous wedding we had yesterday, it would have been this one. However, God has His own plans, and here we are. So I was just reflecting on how it actually all goes together, because most of you were at the wedding yesterday, not all of you, but you heard me talk about how every darn wedding I'm determined not to get sucked into it, and every time I do, just by the beauty of love, however it's expressed. We have this elevated idea of divine love, and we have the Bhagavad Gita, which, believe me, I'm not going to argue with Krishna on this point, where he talks about how we can get drawn out of our divine intention by particularizing our affections and imagining that there is only one, infatuation is the word they use, that there is only one possibility for this divine intention to be fulfilled, and then from that follows a whole host of other catastrophes, which lead ultimately to Judas, but I don't think we're going to talk about Judas much today. We'll see whether he comes in or not. We'll save him for next Easter. Sufficient unto the day is Easter. We can deal with that. But in the context of all of this, when we were sitting, some of us yesterday afternoon, at the reception for the wedding we had in the morning, I was sitting with Peter Sanjaya Kretzmann, who's now the proud uncle of the first baby born to a woman who was born at Ananda. Okay, she's not the first child, not the first woman to have a baby of her generation, but it's the first second born at Ananda. So little Bodhi is his name, and he's kind of collectively belongs to the whole world of Ananda. I'm not going to embarrass Sanjaya too much, but just a little. He too being born at Ananda, it takes a village to raise a child, and so a lot of us childless women in the community just sort of freely adopt every child around, somewhere between affection and what I call a scientific interest, just to see, because the Bhagavad Gita says that when Arjuna says to Krishna, what if I forsake everything in the world and try to seek God, and then in the end don't find God, what will become of me? And among the things that Krishna says in the famous line, my devotee is never lost, is that you will get good karma. And one of the things that's good karma is that you will get born into a family of yogis, and such a birth is difficult to achieve because many yogis don't have children. So when I see the babies that were born at Ananda from going back to the 70s, these are now grown men and women now, I'm curious, like a scientist, to see, that they warranted this birth, and what are they going to do with it? I'm testing the scripture in this point. So sometimes that has caused me, and specifically to interfere sometimes in the life of these young men. And Peter and I had a little period of time where my perhaps presumptuous, I shifted from mother to smother. That's a phrase I've since learned. And there's a blessing that's given in India when a woman marries based on a male-biased culture. Some Indian women don't like this blessing anymore, but when the woman gets married, she's blessed by saying, may you be the mother of 100 sons. Well, I realized, I said, Peter, when you were born, what happened to you is the blessing got a little garbled, and they said, may you be the son of 100 mothers. He did not dispute it when I said it. He just looked at me with that kind of deer in the headlights look that it would be like to have 100 mothers, all looking out for your welfare all the time. But now he's receiving it from the other side as a mere uncle, because this little tiny Bodhi, who's about 8 or 9 months old and is just in that utterly adorable state, and even Peter, who's not his father, has begun to just notice that, oh, he knows my name, he's excited to see me. And how can you not? He's just adorable. And you see a little baby in your heart, there's nothing you can do with your heart, it just melts right into it. That's why Christmas is so sweet, because the great big Jesus is a little tiny baby. And everybody's just so, There's so much emotion in that. And it's beautiful emotion. Love is love, no matter where it comes from, no matter where it's directed. I recall sitting once, what is now Hansa Temple at Ananda Village used to be our publications building, and there was a balcony out in front that they've now taken off. But we used to sit on that balcony and have our lunch sometimes, and you could see from there the whole vista of the flat area of Ananda Village. And I remember sitting there once, and down at the farm, which was some hundreds of yards away, but in perfect view to me, a father got out of his car at this side, and about the half a length of a football field on this side was his 5-year-old daughter, an adorable little 5-year-old girl. From this side to this side, she screams, "Daddy!" like this. I watch her race across, and without a moment's hesitation, just hurl herself into his arms. He catches her like this. Okay, I'm a nun at this time in my life, and all I can think of, how could you not define your happiness by such an experience? You would have to be made of stone not to feel that way. Then immediately I remember my own upbringing, and I asked my mother once about my childhood, and her words were, "Oh, you were adorable." You know, I had this curly hair. I was saying to my friends just now, and I read books all the time. So I had this huge vocabulary of mispronounced words that I only barely understood. And you can extrapolate backwards and imagine what I was like. And how much I must have amused the adults around me all the time. But when I was 18, I was ready to go off into this life that I've lived, because my destiny was not really with the family of my birth. And already by the time I was 18, I was holding on to that. In fact, I was actually introduced to the spiritual path probably about 6 weeks after this conversation with my father. Actually, I'd never thought about the juxtaposition, but it was actually that very same summer was when I first heard about self-realization, and I took to self-realization about that fast. It was just like what I'd been waiting my whole life for. But before that, there was this moment of separation from my father, which even at the time, and even I think today, was one of the most painful moments of my life. Because he was a good man and I was close to him, but his karma in my life was to raise me. Because when I became an adult and he became adult, his reality was never going to be mine. So that relationship that an adult person might have with a father was not going to happen with us. Because Swami was my father. In the truest sense, because he had the Father's wisdom to give me. And my father was just living a good life, but a very, very different life. And we sat together at the table, and in that moment he realized that I was leaving him and I was never coming back. It's the first time I ever saw him cry. I didn't cry because I couldn't afford to. But should he have loved me less? I mean, how could he have loved me less? How could that have been the divine alternative? You see, that's what we get caught in. And that is, it's much more subtle than just, oh, don't go there. You know, for him and for me, I always considered my father was a very powerful influence in my childhood, and I've always been very grateful to him because he gave me so many fine qualities, quite apart from what I couldn't possibly perceive as a child, which is the degree to which, especially at that time when my mother stayed home and raised the children and my father had to earn all the money. And when as an adult, I look back and realized how much he had to sacrifice. You know, how few of his own ambitions actually were realized, his desires, his hopes for himself. He got caught in the war. he was drafted early and he was deflected and never really got back to where he would have been. And we had, by the time the war was over, there were babies and he had to go on and just make a living. So even though in his own mind, at the level of spirituality he was at, he particularized his love. And there was a moment of heartbreak where he lost that. Of course, it was spiritually right for him to give everything he could, as selflessly as he possibly could, to the karma that was in front of him. I had a situation that was not a fraction as poignant, but was the same lesson. When David and I were first married, and Swamiji, I would say he maneuvered us into a position where we had to build this house. And this house is now the guest house for Crystal Hermitage. And to me, that house represented a step into the material world that I never wanted to make. I was always going to just be, I'd intended not to marry until my beautiful husband came into my life and changed those plans. But I'd always intended at least to be impoverished. I was at least going to always be in humble circumstances. And I remember distinctly thinking, living in this tiny little trailer when I was still in the monastic world. I was describing really small places to someone yesterday by saying, you can sit on the couch, put your feet in the oven, and get anything you want out of the refrigerator. It was pretty much where I lived. You get the picture, except that I didn't have either an oven or a refrigerator. But if I had, I could have. So this house represented to me, oh my gosh, I'll have a place where we can have dinner parties. Now, to many people, that would look like a wonderful idea, wouldn't it? Beautiful view, it's a lovely little house. But for me, it was stepping into a world of attachment and, danger, spiritual danger like that. And of course, I was conflicted by the fact that it was Swami Kriyananda himself who was pushing us into building that house. It would never have occurred to us. In fact, he was more than pushing. He had declared, build a house. And David, not having this neurotic nature, just said, sure. Sure. But for me, it was just this huge reality. But of course, Swami finally at the end said to me, anything you're afraid of is karma you still have to face. And that is just such a simple way to put it. I'm afraid of it, therefore I will avoid it. No, anything you're afraid of is something you still have to face. Believe me, that doesn't mean you have to do it. Doesn't mean we all have to go out and have babies and marriages and attachments galore and all those different things. But to refrain because of fear is not the same as freedom. When Swamiji was teaching a class once about emotions, in the early years of Ananda, when we were so young, chronologically young and spiritually young, and there was no context for the spiritual life we were living. Those of you who come into Ananda now, or in the last so many years, there's many of us who were raised by Swamiji and have 30 or 40 years or 25 years of practical spiritual living behind us. So there's real examples around. When we were there in the early 70s, there was no example at all but Swamiji. And Swamiji was playing it very carefully, is the only way I could say it, because he understood that we had to really grow into all of this ourselves. It wasn't just going to be, I am the guru, this is how you behave, this is what you do, this is how we live here, this is what we wear, this is what we say. So we were all sort of guessing, trying to find our footing. And there were kind of two ways that people took it. There was the way that I'm just not going to have anything to do with this. I'm not going to, I'm not going to marry. I'm not going to really like anyone. I'm not going to talk very much. Sometimes I'm not even going to wear shoes. I'm just going to walk around and this will keep me safe. Or the always dressed in white sort of. There were sort of like two ways you would take it. But it was the same one. It was that if I just never touch it, then I'm never really going to fall, am I? Right? And then there were others of us, and I'll put myself in this camp, who just, well, first of all, it just wasn't an option to either be like this or like this. We were just like this, just everywhere, just all over the place, tons of energy, just doing everything we could think of to do, and just crashing and burning on a regular basis, just totally off the walls. One of my friends made a comment not too long ago about the somewhat chaotic emotional life of some of the people who are living at Ananda now in their 20s and falling in love and falling out of love and falling into love and out of love. And my friend sort of expressed a certain, my, just look at them. I looked at her, I said, how short is your memory? My word, you are having a senior moment right now. Because that was what we did to learn like that. But I remember vividly, and of course, Swamiji talked a great deal, and you always heard the part that was the best. You heard the part that was for you. Everybody would go into a class, and we'd all come out with our choice phrase, and often they would contradict each other, because it would just depend on what we needed to hear or wanted to hear. But he gave a class once, I remember, on how to work with your emotions, which of course was right in the center of this question. But he said, and it always seemed very important to me, far better, he said, to be completely carried away by your emotions, he said, than to always be censoring yourself. Because if you're censoring yourself, the energy never has an opportunity to come before you. And you're not overcoming it, you're merely postponing the day when you have to face it. He said, even if it's far more embarrassing, humiliating perhaps, to just always be there and distressing to yourself, he said, at least it's in front of you. And in this whole, and I'm not talking about the Judas side of the reading today, I'm just talking about the Gita side. First we desire something, then we begin to focus on it all the time, then we become infatuated, then we don't get our desires and we become angry, and then our discrimination is lost. Believe me, really memorize that and watch yourself when you start down that road. But do not allow yourself, and this is what David read today, introspection. No, excuse me, it was in the reading today, also here. We should have a great respect for the power of delusion, but not to the point where we cower in fear. And that's the razor's edge that we always have to walk. We have to recognize the fact that if I follow and allow the power of myself to come through, it's going to come through the power of myself. It's not going to come through the power of perfection. The energy is going to be there, and I'm going to be what I'm going to be. And I may find myself following, just rolling right down that hill that the Bhagavad Gita described. But should my father have loved me less? I mean, of course, the self-evident answer is no, of course he shouldn't have. But we ourselves, you see, have to learn this reality, and we don't learn it from just not committing ourselves. We don't get out of karma by doing it badly, is the other phrase that Swamiji gave me. You think you'll just do it badly. No. You do it wholeheartedly. And you allow that power to flow, and then you learn to navigate in a divine way with the full force of who you are. Because we're not talking here about throwing away our spiritual principles or our spiritual perception or anything like that. I've helped people through this cycle. One of the things that happens when you get on the spiritual path is as you become more focused, as you begin to refine your karma, as you begin to dissolve vrittis with kriya, a certain amount of energy that was trapped in old patterns, old desires, gets drawn into the river of your current life force. Sometimes you don't even know it's happened, because the meditation, especially the Kriya practice, has increased the flow of the river to such an extent that all those whirlpools, vrittis, that were holding you back, maybe even from lifetimes you didn't even know, just get drawn into the river. And you find yourself just living with a greater intensity, with a greater awareness, with a greater flow of energy, with a greater capacity to love. All of these things begin to happen. And many of us are used to feeling secure in the little raft of our life by making sure the boat never goes too fast, right? And so we keep ourselves safe because we're always just going at a pace that we can control. And then the spiritual path begins to accelerate. And often the first desire is to pull it back. Because, I'm beginning to, have thoughts I didn't have before. I'm beginning to sometimes to express myself in ways I never did. I'm beginning to give my heart, and it scares me. And so we imagine, I'll become small again. And the mind says, that's the right thing to do. Because I feel better. Yeah, I feel better like this. No, unfortunately, what we have to learn to do is we have to learn to navigate in a centered way at a higher and higher and higher level of reality, of energy, of commitment, of open-heartedness. And once we open our hearts, you see what might happen. You see what might happen. I just remembered, this is a joke in the opposite direction. We were with Swamiji once in England. About 12 of us went with him from Italy to England one year. And we went to Canterbury and to see the cathedral there. And afterwards we went for an Italian dinner, and somebody with a sense of humor there in Canterbury called it Il Vaticano, the Vatican, the Italian restaurant there. So we went there for dinner, for lunch, and we were eating together, and David ordered this delicious chocolate cake. Everybody liked it so much, he passed it around. By the time it came back to him, the plate was empty. So he got the waiter over, and he ordered a second one, and then everybody looked just as eager. He started to pass it around, and Swamiji, with exaggerated drama, grabbed both his arms, and he said, "Don't be a sap. You saw what happened last time." Very often, humor is the best way to teach, isn't it? I gave my heart away and the plate came back empty. Are you going to actually do that again? Yes, sir, I am. I'm going to pass it around again, and if the plate comes back empty, my heart will come back full. And that's what we have to have confidence in. You see, that's how we navigate it at a very high level. And there's no guarantee that darling little baby's going to love you when they get to be an adult. There's just no guarantee, because who knows what their destiny really is. Some people have lifelong karma together, some you're just going to raise the baby and then the baby's going to go away. And I'm touched, but in a very painful way, when I see people, I'm old enough now to have watched a lot of generations, see people, I wasn't close to my parents after I grew up, and so my kids are going to be close to me. And I think, oh dear, please don't say that. Please don't say that, because there's no guarantee. But should we give our hearts less because there's no guarantee? And this is where we ultimately come to. We're not giving our hearts to each other. I didn't give my heart to my physical father, and he didn't really give his heart to me, even though he thought he did. We're always giving our heart to God. As we were saying yesterday, a certain window opens, and what that window gives us, we don't understand this. We think it's that person. I can love this person because we like this together, we like that together. She looks just like I always wanted a woman to look. He's just the man I always wanted. I have this long list. But you know what we're saying? Now, therefore, I can love. I can open my heart. But we could always have opened our hearts. It's that we didn't. So then we have to be given permission to do it, and then we have to understand what we're really doing. No matter what the frame around the window, the light that we see is always the light of God calling us back. And even if it goes right through the window of this adorable child, this beautiful woman, this noble husband, this wonderful mother, this wonderful father, really we're just opening our hearts and sending it right through that window to God. And we just have to do that over and over and over and over until we realize, oh, it's giving my heart to God. That's what was giving me so much bliss. And this window or that window or all windows or no windows, it's giving my heart to God. That's what this was always about. And then we have the bliss without the shadow. Because then it's the bliss of our own nature fulfilling itself in everything that we do. And finally, the destiny for which we were born is fulfilled. God bless you.